It's an exciting day. Version 2 of the firmware for the FX9 is out, and it's about a month ahead of schedule, which is good. I've got it nice and early on an SD card here so we can see what it's all about. Hopefully it'll feel like a brand new camera. Just pop the SD card in the slot, open up your menu, straight to the bottom, maintenance, into there, bottom again, version, and version up. Now at this point, I'd definitely recommend running your camera on mains. You don't want the power going halfway through and ending up with an expensive brick. But here goes. This shouldn't take too long. Ta-da! Okay, I think that's done. Mine stuck at 80% for a long time, like more than 10 minutes, and I started to get a little worried, but if yours does the same, don't panic, it will get there eventually. It says turn it off and on again, and it's probably a hang-up from my old F5 55 days, but after doing a firmware update, I always do an all reset and turn it off and on again, twice. It probably doesn't need it, but better be safe. The good news is, all your settings that you saved to the SD card in the All Files file, they seem to still work. So you can load those up and go back to where you were before the firmware update. So now, we get to try the new touchscreen that we suspected was there all along. And it's a little disappointing to see that it doesn't include the menu. You can't navigate around the menu like you can on the A7S III. It does, however, work on the new status pages, which is really useful. So you can just tap on anything you want. Oh, we can see straight away we've got the DCI 4K of 4096, presumably 24p as well, which would be useful. It looks like everything you're allowed to change within the status menu is surrounded by a square, and the feel of this is very responsive. I like it. And if we go back to the first page, we can see we've got a brand new recording mode. Full frame crop 5K, and we can change the frame rate of this all the way up to 60p, which is really useful and about half what you can get on the new A7S Mark III, but of course that's in full frame. It's worth looking at how much crop we've got, and now we've got a full frame 6K scan, a 5K crop scan, and a Super 35 size scan. I have a feeling that the 5K crop is going to be a very popular mode to work in, and it'll be really interesting to see how many Super 35 size lenses have an image circle that'll cover that crop. Going into the big boy menu now, and right back to basics, you can see under the base setting that we now have 3 different shooting modes: SDR, HDR and Cine-EI. We used to only have 2 with Custom and Cine-EI, but I think these are better names. They mean something. SDR is like the old Custom mode. HDR gives us some hyperlog gammas. There's 2 different flavours, live and neutral. And Cine-EI, well, that's Cine-EI. I haven't had a chance to properly test out the hyperlog gammas, but on the face of it, they look very pleasing and a welcome addition. And on the subject of Cine-EI, we've now got our user LUTs back, which now means we can burn in our 3D LUTs. When Sony first launched the FX9, there were a few engineers that looked surprised when we said we wanted to be able to do that. I use it for matching to other cameras. If I'm working with camera guys who've got other different makes of cameras, using a LUT and burning it in to match this to the other camera is very useful. It keeps the clients happy. The next big thing we've got with this upgrade is the ability to go up to 180 frames per second in HD for slow-mo. And that's obviously using the full frame 2K scan. What I found really odd is that initially I couldn't get it past 150 frames per second. And then I realised that you had to be in NTSC base frame rates before it'll let you go to 180. I don't know why they do that. I get the whole mains electricity cycle thing, but why can't they let us decide rather than... Anyway, if you need 180 frames per second, just switch it to NTSC frame rate and it'll still drop into a PAL timeline, no problem. When you come out of slow-mo, it still doesn't remember your base shutter speed. The gain, or the ISO, now goes up higher, 27 dB. Mad, but surprisingly clean. And now the big news. You've now got eye detect, just like the A7S Mark III. But also, you can control the autofocus now from using the touch screen. So if you're picking a person or choosing a square or moving a square around that you want to focus on, you can just touch the screen and off it goes. A bit like the A7S Mark III. The SDI outputs are now 6G compatible, so you can send a 4K picture at the lower frame rates to a monitor or an external recorder if you want to. And talking of outputs, the RAW output is now enabled out of this. Well, it's not enabled out of the camera. You still have to buy that monstrosity of a huge XDCA FX9 back, I think it's called, just to get the SDI output. It's the same sort of 16-bit RAW that you get out of the HDMI on an A7S Mark III. Apparently, there's also been some picture improvements to the Super 35 2K scan mode, some improvements to the audio, and network improvements as well, none of which I've been properly able to have a look at. Now don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for what the Sony gods have bestowed upon us with this latest firmware for the FX9. I just think there's now a little bit of a problem with the marketing between this relatively new cinema line camera and the A7S Mark III. I mean, obviously this is a large box with XLRs, SDI outputs, a viewfinder and a variable shutter. But in almost every other way, the A7S Mark III outperforms this camera. I know a lot of DOPs will argue about ergonomics and having lots of buttons and a bigger box, something to impress the clients. If I was to single out just one little moan, it would be that XDCA FX9 back end that apparently we have to spend £2,500 on the back of an already large camera just to give us an SDI RAW output. And yet the little A7S Mark III gives us a RAW output through the HDMI socket, all built into that tiny little mirrorless body camera, for not much more money than the back end on this. Does that sound right to you? Also, virtually every full-frame mirrorless camera is now giving us the RAW output as an option through the HDMI socket, so the electronics can't be that much of a problem. Anyway, version 2 firmware for the FX9. It's good. It improves an already great camera, don't think it isn't. And Sony have already announced version 3 firmware for early next year. And that's going to give us things like the center crop mode that I really miss off my F5. So all in all, things are looking good for the FX9. I hope Sony continues to support it as long as they did the F5. Thanks for watching.